Geoffrey, for you, would you give a legal view
Yes, I
on,
would,
because there is a legal question here.
Geoffrey's written a wonderful book on this whole subject of de-accession, as it's called.
Yes, there is certainly a legal side, as well as the obvious side, I think, which is the fact that this is the last great work of the ancient world that survives, even though half of it survives in the dark room of the British Museum dedicated to an art fraudster, Lord Doughty, and the alternative is to remove it, to reunite it with the other half, which are on the top floor of the museum, the Acropolis Museum, beneath the blue attic sky and the remnants of the Parthenon. So I think where can it best be appreciated is answered obviously in Athens. But it's important to understand how the marbles were taken. Why did Elgin succeed when the French, a few years before, had failed? They wanted to get their hands on it. Well, the reason Elgin succeeded is unimpeachably because he bribed and corrupted 3 Turkish Ottoman officials: the military governor, who was in charge of the Acropolis, the civil governor in charge of Athens, and the Qadi, the chief justice, the Ottoman chief justice of Athens. They were paid, and we have a record of what they were paid. Savile Row suits they were made for them, dueling pistols engraved in gold were given to them. Telescopes from London were sent to them, plus an awful lot of money. We know this because it was sworn testimony by the man who did the bribing, Elgin's agent, who was a vicar, who came to end up his life as a country parson. And he happened to be in London at the time there was an inquiry, and they hoiked him in to give evidence, and he did. And so it's the unimpeachable fact that this was achieved, cutting the sculptures in half, taking them to the house, the garden of the British ambassador in Athens, and putting them on what was very often a British naval ship at Piraeus. That is clear, so that and of course, law, particularly international law, has moved on. Only a few years ago, the World Court held that any contract that was brought into being by corruption was void from the beginning, and that is the test that today is applied where you have proof of corruption. So I would expect that if it got to the International Court of Justice, it would be likely that Britain would be embarrassed, would actually lose the case. But this win-win proposal, this deal, which will give the British Museum many fine examples of ancient Greek art and culture, in return for the marbles, whether it's a loan, permanent, it will end up being a permanent loan.
We're into semantics by then.
But I think the one thing that is worth mentioning, when Amal Clooney and I did some 10 years ago at the request of Mr. Samaras, we investigated the story of the marbles in the British Foreign Office, and there was an extraordinary but secret inquiry under Nigel Nicholson, actually, which reported that Greece deserved to have the marbles back, that the rightful thing was to return them. The sad thing subsequently was the British Prime Minister, Mrs. Thatcher, took a marked dislike to Melina Mercouri and ordered that they should stay. But one of the clinching arguments, interestingly enough, in the Foreign Office report, its conclusion that Greece deserved it back, was that Greece and Great Britain were the only two countries after the collapse of France to fight the Germans for democracy. I mean, Serbia fought, but they mainly fought each other, the Serbs, at the time. And nonetheless, there you have. And it was the plan to return them with this as the reason, part of the theme, that we were the two countries that fought the fascists for democracy when it was necessary to fight. And so I think, hopefully, that will remain the theme when they are returned, as it looks as though they will be.
Well, Melissa, can I turn to you because you're, I think, quite close to the whatever negotiations are happening, for a sense of where we are on this. Are things really moving right now?
You know, the negotiations have been ongoing for a few years now, and I think that's very important to recognize that there's a willingness to come to the table. You know, we've had this discussion about democracy, and of course the vitality of democracy depends not only on our institutions, but on the ties that bind us as societies. And cultural diplomacy is our greatest tool to doing that. We rebuild trust, we strengthen mutual respect. You know, it underpins humanity. And so cultural diplomacy as a way to communicate and connect through history, art, and ideas is something that I think the two parties, the Greek government and the British Museum, are trying to undertake and are wrestling with. And certainly it's not lost on us that in the greater context of what we just heard, what a great opportunity for us to do something positive for humanity. And I think Stephen mentioned that the time is now, that things are poised for that. Our campaign, the Parthenon Project, has put forward an ambitious, forward-looking, long-term cultural partnership approach between the two countries, something that would benefit future generations, that would be a true win-win. And we draw on the principles of cultural diplomacy to put that idea forward. So if I may, just briefly, the contours are, of course, the orderly and complete return of the sculptures from the British Museum back to their home here in their purpose-built Acropolis Museum. As Geoffrey mentioned, rotating exhibits of never-before-seen artifacts that would leave Greece and be, you know, masterpieces that the British public and visitors of the British Museum, the patrons, could witness. And in its context, we should consider that the British Museum is undertaking a $1 billion reimagination and renovation of the Western Ranged galleries. And that offers a significant opportunity as they're thinking about what their display strategy will be. Will they have a Hellenic gallery? We'd like to see it, the Duveen Gallery, renamed, of course, to the Hellenic Gallery. And what a great opportunity for Greece to have in the center of London its own, you know, dedicated space and museum. Or they may opt for a display strategy where we can experience the evolution and the interaction of societies over time. And there, the rotating exhibits from Greece can be leveraged to great benefit because, of course, from prehistoric era all through Byzantine, a narrative can be told with the inclusion of these pieces. The third component of our campaign is to establish a foundation. That foundation would support scholarship between the UK and Greece on educational, cultural scholarship and programs. and would underpin this cultural partnership between the two countries. And the fourth point, and just landing on what you refer to as the semantics, we would like to put forward an agree to disagree principle. The question of ownership is difficult, and we don't need to agree on that. There's great and profound history on this topic where the agree to disagree principle was used, and why not move past that? Why see that as a stumbling block when two great allies, as was mentioned, can come together? We have cross-party support. Polling in the UK supports the reunification. 64% of Brits would support the return of the sculptures and have the opportunity to see these blockbuster pieces from Greece. So why not seize this moment?
Yeah.
Lord Vasey, you were, I think, the longest-serving culture minister.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just to be clear, they're not clapping me for being the longest-serving culture minister. They're clapping Melissa's brilliant exposition of the Parthenon project's aims.
Yes, but you were the longest-serving culture minister of UK. So I think the appropriate question for you is that what you might well ask when you hear these expositions of the history, the fact that you haven't even mentioned that they're all jumbled up in the British Museum and they're not seen as they should be as a single story as originally displayed, and the solutions that you proposed, which would involve cultural exchange and a finessing of the ownership question. The question then is, why hasn't it happened already? And part of the answer is, as you would be well aware as culture minister, is that this is sensitive stuff in Britain. So the popular press in Britain would not miss an opportunity to shout about this. Yes, as the headline, you can read it now. And indeed, when many of you here will remember when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, he actually refused to meet the Greek Prime Minister when he was in London because he'd mentioned something about the Parthenon Sculptures. So do you think that we can politically get it over the line in Britain?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I think it's worth reminding our Greek friends how embedded the Parthenon Sculptures, or as the Brits call them, the Elgin Marbles, are in our psyche. It's about a nation trying to come to terms with its place in the modern world and looking back fondly on the time when it once, as it were, had an empire and straddled the globe. And I, as the culture minister, took the path of least resistance. I had grown up believing that the Elgin Marbles were ours and legally acquired. And as a result, I only have a footnote in Geoffrey's masterful book on the Parthenon Sculptures where I write a rude letter to UNESCO telling them the Elgin Marbles are ours and hands off. But I've had a conversion on the road to Damascus because it only takes a few seconds to realize among all the contested treasures that different countries claim, the Parthenon Sculptures are the most easy to understand because effectively you're reuniting one work of art. And once you accept that you're reuniting a work of art, it's not very difficult to work out that perhaps it should be situated where it was originally created and placed rather than in London. So it's a very easy argument to win, but you are absolutely right. It's bound up in British psychology. And to pick up on what Melissa was saying, I think there's a huge opportunity for Britain, in a funny way, making this decision to return Parthenon Sculptures, to come to terms with its place in the world, and to acknowledge that we are not, it would be a generous act on our part, and we love to think about the things that we have given the world, but it would also acknowledge the incredible influence that the Greeks and ancient Greek civilization has had on Britain. You only have to walk around any city in the UK, particularly at the time of our greatest wealth in the 19th century, and you see the massive influence of classical antiquity everywhere. And I think there is a great opportunity in the act of returning the sculptures to where they should be for the British Museum to make a great leap forward, not just in acquiring on loan some great Greek artifacts which have never left Greece, but also to tell the story of the Greek influence on the UK. And it will take what is already a very strong friendship to another level, and it will show the power of cultural diplomacy, which enables us to have conversations with each other which are much more rich and discursive than the sort of rather traditional conversations nation-states tend to have between them. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity. I think the climate has changed, because I think we have no government really wants to touch this, because the right-wing press gets very worked up. But we do at least have a government here which I think the best position is to say it won't stand in the way of any deal that the British Museum does with the Greek government. And we are very lucky in the Parthenon project, by the way, to have two of the most distinguished Labour cultural leaders as part of our team. We have Sir Ben Bradshaw, who's in the room tonight, a former very distinguished culture secretary. Stand up, Ben. Show us where you are.
Hey.
And also Baroness Tangham Debonair, who is by far the most powerful cultural voice in the Labour Party in 2025. Stand up, Tangham.
Baroness something, I don't know. Oh, yes. I think it's also worth reminding British people, and this may be a way of getting the British to feel proud, that we're approaching, and this is why the time is now, we're approaching, as all the Greek people here know, more and more anniversaries of the bicentenary of the freedom of Greece, the eleftheria of the Hellenic Republic. The Battle of Navarino, which was a battle fought by the Greeks and the British and the Russians, in fact, and led by Admiral Codrington, and was the first victory against the Ottoman Empire that led to the freedom of Greece. And that in the next few years, it will be that bicentenary, which is a perfect time to reinforce the friendship of the Greek people and the British people.
Well
and it
said.
should, you know.
Well said.
Yeah.
Really good point.
Yeah.